What happens when one of Hollywood's biggest stars sits down for what's supposed to be a friendly morning chat and it turns into an absolute powder keg? When the cameras started rolling on Good Morning America, nobody expected the tension that was about to explode between Julia Roberts and Diane Sawyer. This wasn't your typical celebrity interview. This was something else entirely. Before we get into what went down, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below telling me what you think about celebrity interviews that go off the rails. The studio lights were bright as always, and the familiar Good Morning America set had that polished, professional atmosphere. Julia Roberts walked onto the set with her trademark smile, waving to the audience as they applauded. Diane Sawyer stood to greet her, and they exchanged the customary hug that morning show hosts and guests always do. Everything seemed perfectly normal. Everything seemed like it was going to be just another promotional interview. They both settled into their chairs, and Diane opened with what appeared to be a softball question. "Julia, it's wonderful to have you here. You've been in the public eye for decades now, and you've managed to maintain this incredible career. How do you do it?" Julia smiled, but there was something slightly guarded in her expression. "Well, Diane, I think it's about choosing the right projects and surrounding yourself with good people. It's really that simple." Diane nodded, but then she leaned forward slightly. "You say it's simple, but there have been reports over the years, whispers really, about you being difficult to work with. How do you respond to that?" The smile on Julia's face flickered for just a moment. "I think difficult is a word that gets thrown around a lot, especially when it comes to women who know what they want and aren't afraid to ask for it." "So you're saying the reports aren't true?" Diane pressed, her tone still friendly but with an edge that hadn't been there before. Julia shifted in her seat. "I'm saying that I have standards. I care about the work. If that makes me difficult, then I suppose I'm guilty as charged." The audience was quiet now. This wasn't the light, breezy conversation they'd expected. Diane wasn't backing down. "But Julia, we've spoken to people who've worked with you, and some of them have said that it goes beyond just having standards. They've described behavior that, well, made their job significantly harder." Julia's expression hardened. "Who exactly have you spoken to, Diane? Because I find it interesting that you're bringing this up now, in this forum, without giving me any specifics. Are we really doing this?" Diane maintained her composure. "We're journalists, Julia. When we hear consistent reports from multiple sources, we have an obligation to ask questions. That's what journalism is." "Journalism?" Julia repeated, and there was a bite in her voice now. "Is that what this is? Because it feels more like an ambush. I came here to talk about my new film, and instead you're dredging up anonymous accusations." "They're not anonymous to us," Diane said calmly, "and I think our viewers deserve to hear your side of the story. You've been a beloved figure for so long, but these questions exist. Don't you think it's better to address them head-on?" Julia laughed, but there was no humor in it. "My side of the story? Diane, you haven't even told me what the story is. You're speaking in vague terms about reports and whispers. That's not journalism. That's gossip dressed up in a nice suit." The tension in the studio was palpable now. The crew members were exchanging glances, and you could feel the energy shift in the room. This was live television, and it was going somewhere nobody had planned for. Diane pressed forward. "All right, let's be specific then. On the set of your film 3 years ago, there were reports that you had your co-star's trailer moved because you didn't want to walk past it on your way to set. Is that true?" Julia's eyes widened. "Are you serious right now? You're asking me about trailer placement? Do you know how film sets work, Diane? Do you know how many logistical decisions get made every single day that have nothing to do with anyone being difficult? So you're denying it? I'm saying it's absurd. Even if it happened, which I'm not confirming, how is that news? How is that worth bringing up on national television?" Diane leaned back slightly, but her gaze remained fixed on Julia. "Because it's part of a pattern, Julia. It's not just one incident. There are multiple instances over multiple films. At some point, we have to ask if there's substance to these claims." Julia's jaw tightened. "A pattern? You're sitting here telling me there's a pattern of me being difficult based on what? Based on someone saying I wanted a trailer moved? Do you have any idea how ridiculous that sounds? I'm simply asking the questions that people want answered. No, Julia said, her voice rising slightly. You're asking questions designed to make me look bad. There's a difference. And what's interesting to me, Diane, is that I don't see you doing these kinds of interviews with male actors. When a man has standards, when a man demands excellence, he's called a perfectionist. When a woman does it, she's difficult. Diane raised her hand in a placating gesture. Julia, that's not fair. We've interviewed plenty of male actors about their behavior on set. Have you? Julia challenged. Have you really? Or do you just accept their eccentricities as part of their genius? Because from where I'm sitting, this feels very targeted. The audience was completely silent. Some people were leaning forward in their seats, captivated by what was unfolding. Others looked uncomfortable, as if they wanted to be anywhere else but there. Diane tried to regain control of the interview. Julia, I understand you're upset, but these are legitimate questions. You're a public figure. You've made a career out of being in the spotlight. With that comes scrutiny. Scrutiny is one thing, Julia shot back. This is something else entirely. You invited me here under the pretense of discussing my work, and instead you've turned this into some kind of trial. And I haven't even been given the chance to face my accusers. Your accusers? Diane repeated. Julia, these are industry professionals who've worked with you. They're not accusers. They're sources. Sources, Julia said, shaking her head. Anonymous sources who get to say whatever they want without any accountability. Do you know what that sounds like to me, Diane? It sounds like cowardice. Diane's expression remained neutral, but you could see the wheels turning behind her eyes. So you think the people who've spoken about their experiences working with you are cowards? I think people who make claims without putting their names to them are cowards, yes. If someone has a problem with how I work, they can come to me directly. They can have a conversation with me like an adult. What they don't get to do is run to the press and hide behind anonymity while someone like you uses it to create drama. This isn't about creating drama. Julia, this is about having an honest conversation. Julia laughed again, and this time it was sharper, more bitter. An honest conversation? Diane, you came into this with an agenda. You had these questions loaded and ready. This was never going to be a conversation. This was always going to be an interrogation. Diane took a breath, and when she spoke again, her voice was measured. Julia, I've been doing this job for a very long time. I ask difficult questions because that's what the job requires. It's not personal. It feels pretty personal from where I'm sitting, Julia replied. And you know what? I'm done pretending this is normal. I'm done acting like this is okay. The studio felt like it had dropped 10 degrees. Diane Sawyer sat perfectly still, clearly not expecting Julia to push back this hard. But Julia wasn't finished. She leaned forward, her eyes locked on Diane's. You want to talk about patterns? Julia continued. Let's talk about the pattern of women in this industry being held to impossible standards. Let's talk about how we're expected to be grateful for every opportunity, to smile and nod, and never speak up when something isn't right. Is that the pattern you want to discuss? Diane cleared her throat. Julia, I think you're misunderstanding the intent here. We're not trying to tear you down. We're trying to get to the truth. The truth, Julia repeated slowly. The truth is that I've been in this business for over 30 years. I've worked with some of the best directors, actors, and crew members in the world. I've also worked with some of the worst. And yes, I've spoken up when things weren't right. I've advocated for myself and for others. If that's what your sources are calling difficult, then I'll wear that badge proudly. Diane tried to redirect. Can you give me an example of a time when you felt you needed to speak up? Julia paused, considering whether to engage. There was a film, I won't name it, where the director wanted to cut corners on safety protocols. We were doing a stunt, sequence, and he wanted to rush through it without proper preparation. I stopped production for 3 hours until we could get the right equipment and the right people in place. Was that difficult? Probably. Did it save someone from potentially getting hurt? Absolutely. That's admirable, Diane said. But that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about interpersonal behavior. We're talking about how you treat the people around you on a day-to-day basis. Julia's expression darkened. You want to know how I treat people? I show up on time. I know my lines. I do my job. I treat people with respect as long as they treat me with respect. But I'm not going to apologize for having boundaries. I'm not going to apologize for not being available 24/7. I'm not going to apologize for saying no when something doesn't feel right. Nobody's asking you to apologize for having boundaries, Diane countered. But there's a difference between having boundaries and being dismissive of people. Dismissive, Julia said, her voice tight. Now I'm dismissive. What else, Diane? What other adjectives do your anonymous sources have for me? Am I demanding? Am I temperamental? Am I a diva? Diane didn't flinch. Those words have been used, yes. The audience gasped. It was subtle, but you could hear it, that collective intake of breath. This was getting ugly, and everyone knew it. Julia stood up suddenly, and for a moment it looked like she might walk off the set, but she didn't. Instead, she paced a few steps, then turned back to face Diane. You know what's interesting? I've been watching your show for years. I've seen you interview politicians who've lied to the public. I've seen you interview business leaders who've destroyed people's lives. And you know what? You treated them with more respect than you're treating me right now. Julia, please sit down. Let's have a civil conversation about this. A civil conversation? Julia said, still standing. Diane, there's nothing civil about what you're doing. You ambushed me. You brought me on this show under false pretenses, and now you're attacking my character based on hearsay. Diane's voice remained calm. I'm not attacking your character. I'm asking you to address legitimate concerns that people in the industry have raised. Julia finally sat back down, but she was on the edge of her seat now, her body language radiating frustration. Legitimate concerns. You keep using that phrase like it means something. But you haven't given me anything legitimate. You've given me vague accusations and anonymous sources. That's not legitimate. That's a hit piece. If it were a hit piece, Julia, we wouldn't have invited you here to respond. We're giving you a platform to tell your side. My side? Julia's voice rose again. My side is that I'm a professional who cares about her work. My side is that I've dedicated my life to this craft. My side is that I don't deserve to be sitting here defending myself against accusations I can't even properly address because you won't tell me who's making them or what specifically they're claiming. Diane leaned forward. All right, let me be more specific. We spoke to a makeup artist who worked with you 2 years ago. She said that you refused to speak to her directly and would only communicate through your assistant. She said it made her feel disrespected and made her job much harder. How do you respond to that? Julia's eyes narrowed. 2 years ago. You're reaching back 2 years to find something to pin on me. And you want to know about the makeup artist? Fine, I'll tell you. That was during a period when I was dealing with a personal crisis. I wasn't in a good place mentally, and I needed to create some distance between myself and the constant demands of being on set. So yes, I had my assistant handle certain communications. Was it ideal? No. But it was necessary for my mental health at the time. Poitsy, did you explain that to the people affected? I don't owe anyone an explanation about my mental health, Diane. That's private. That's personal. And the fact that you're using it against me now, the fact that you're twisting a difficult period in my life into evidence of me being difficult, that's really low. Oh, the words hung in the air like smoke. Diane shifted in her seat, and for the first time she looked slightly uncomfortable. Julia, that's not what I'm doing. I'm simply trying to understand the full picture. The full picture, Julia said quietly, dangerously. You want the full picture? Here it is. I'm a woman in an industry that chews people up and spits them out. I've survived by being smart, by being talented, and yes, by being tough. I've had to be tough because if I wasn't, I would have been pushed aside a long time ago. Every single day, I make decisions about what I will and won't accept. And sometimes those decisions upset people. Sometimes they make me unpopular, but they keep me sane, and they keep me working. Diane nodded slowly, absorbing what Julia had said. I hear you. I understand that this industry is challenging, especially for women. But doesn't that mean we should hold ourselves to a higher standard? Shouldn't we be lifting each other up instead of creating hostile work environments? Julia's expression hardened even more. Hostile work environments? Now you're accusing me of creating hostile work environments? Diane, do you hear yourself? You're escalating this with every question. First I'm difficult, then I'm dismissive, now I'm creating hostile work environments. What's next? Am I abusive? Am I a monster? Those are your words, not mine, Diane said carefully. But they're the implication, aren't they? Julia shot back. That's where this is heading. You start with the small stuff, the trailer placement, the assistant communication, and you build it into something bigger and bigger until suddenly I'm the villain of my own story. Diane took a breath. Julia, I have another question, and I need you to be honest with me. There was an incident on your last film where you allegedly had a producer removed from the project. Multiple crew members reported that there was a confrontation, and within a week, that producer was gone. What happened there? Julia went very still. When she spoke, her voice was ice cold. That producer was sexually harassing young women on set. I reported it. I pushed for his removal. And yes, I made it clear that I would not continue working on that film if he remained. So if you're asking me if I had him removed, the answer is yes. And I'd do it again in a heartbeat. The studio was dead silent. Diane blinked, clearly not expecting that answer. We weren't aware of those circumstances. Of course you weren't, Julia said, her voice dripping with contempt. Because you didn't do your homework. You took the word of your sources without bothering to find out the full story. That producer? He's been telling people that I had him fired because we had creative differences. He's been painting himself as the victim, and painting me as the difficult actress who couldn't be pleased. And apparently you bought it. Diane looked visibly shaken now. Julia, if that's true, if there was harassment involved, that changes everything. It doesn't change anything, Julia interrupted. Because you should have known that before you came at me with these questions. You should have done the work to understand context before you decided to air my dirty laundry on national television. But you didn't. You were too eager to have your gotcha moment. That's not fair, Diane protested. We did our due diligence. We spoke to multiple sources. You spoke to people who had an axe to grind, Julia corrected. You spoke to people who were upset that I wouldn't play the game, that I wouldn't just smile and be grateful and keep my mouth shut. You spoke to a producer who's covering up his own misconduct. That's who your sources are, Diane. That's who you chose to believe over me. Diane straightened in her chair. We're going to look into those allegations. If what you're saying is true, we'll absolutely follow up on that story. Julia laughed bitterly. Oh, now you want to investigate. Now that I've embarrassed you on your own show, now you're interested in the truth. Where was this journalistic integrity 5 minutes ago when you were throwing accusations at me? Julia, I'm trying to be fair here. Fair? Julia's voice cracked slightly. Diane, there's nothing fair about this. You invited me here. You blindsided me. And you've spent the last 20 minutes trying to destroy my reputation. And for what? For ratings? For clicks? What's the end game here? Diane's composure was slipping now. The end game is truth. It's accountability. It's making sure that people in positions of power aren't abusing that power. And you never stopped to consider that maybe, just maybe, I'm not the one abusing power? You never considered that maybe I'm the one trying to protect people from those who do abuse it? Julia's eyes were bright now, emotional in a way they hadn't been before. Do you have any idea how hard it is to speak up in this industry? Do you know what it costs? I'm sure it's difficult, Diane said, but her voice lacked conviction. You have no idea, Julia said quietly. Every time I speak up, every time I say something isn't right, I become the problem. I become difficult, Julia. I become the diva. And people like you, journalists who are supposed to be looking for the truth, You just repeat the narrative without questioning it. You make it easier for the bad actors to keep operating because you're too busy tearing down the women who won't stay silent. Diane tried to respond. Julia, I think you're being unfair to me and to this show. We've broken important stories. We've held powerful people accountable. Have you? Julia challenged. Or have you just gone after easy targets? Women who speak up? Women who don't play nice? Because from where I'm sitting, that seems to be your specialty. The tension was suffocating. Members of the audience were shifting uncomfortably. Some were pulling out their phones, undoubtedly recording what was happening. This was already going viral, and it wasn't even over yet. Diane made one more attempt to regain control. Julia, I think we've gotten off track here. Can we take a step back and have a reasonable conversation about this? A reasonable conversation? Julia stood up again, and this time she started removing her microphone. Diane, we're way past reasonable. You came after me without having all the facts. You tried to paint me as some kind of tyrant based on incomplete information and biased sources. And when I pushed back, when I told you the truth, you act like I'm the one being unreasonable. Julia, please, let's not end it like this. Julia dropped the microphone on her chair. It's already ended, Diane. This interview is over. And I hope your viewers see this for what it really is. This isn't journalism. This is character assassination. And I won't be a part of it. Diane stood up quickly, her professional mask cracking. Julia, wait, please. Let's talk about this off camera if you prefer. We can take a break. Julia paused, turning back to face her. Off camera? Now you want to go off camera? No, Diane. You wanted to do this in front of millions of people. You wanted the spectacle. So let's finish it right here, right now. That's not what this is about, Diane insisted, but her voice wavered. Then what is it about? Julia demanded. Tell me. Tell everyone watching. What was the point of this interview? Because it clearly wasn't about my new film. It wasn't about my career. It was about tearing me down. So explain it to me. Explain it to them. Diane looked at the camera, then back at Julia. We report on what people tell us. We investigate stories that matter to our audience. That's our job. Your job, Julia said, shaking her head. Your job is to tell the truth, Diane. Not to amplify gossip. Not to give a platform to people with agendas. And you failed at your job today. You failed spectacularly. A producer off camera tried to signal for a commercial break, but Diane waved them off. She was committed now, for better or worse. Julia, you're upset, and I understand that. But we stand by our reporting. We spoke to credible sources who had legitimate concerns. Credible sources, Julia repeated mockingly. You mean the harasser who I got fired? You mean the people who were upset that I wouldn't compromise on safety? Those are your credible sources? Do you realize how that makes you look? Diane's jaw tightened. We didn't know about the harassment allegations until you mentioned them just now. If we had known, we would have approached this differently. But you didn't know, Julia pressed. And that's the problem. You didn't do your homework. You didn't verify. You just took what people said at face value because it fit the narrative you wanted to tell. Difficult actress causes problems on set. It's a story you've told 100 times because it's easy and it gets attention. We did verify, Diane insisted. We corroborated accounts from multiple sources. Julia stepped closer to Diane now, her voice low and intense. Multiple sources who all have reasons to discredit me. Multiple sources who benefit from making me look bad. Did you talk to any of the actors I've worked with? Did you talk to any of the directors who've worked with me multiple times? Did you talk to anyone who might actually give you a balanced perspective? Diane hesitated, and that hesitation told Julia everything she needed to know. You didn't, Julia said softly. You went looking for dirt, and you found people willing to give it to you. That's not journalism, Diane. That's tabloid reporting dressed up as news. The audience was transfixed. Some people looked angry, others looked uncomfortable, but everyone was watching. This was raw, unscripted television, and nobody could look away. Diane tried one more time. Julia, I respect your work. I respect your career. But public figures have to accept scrutiny. That comes with the territory. Scrutiny, yes, Julia agreed. But not ambush, not trial by television. not being accused of things without the chance to properly defend yourself, and certainly not having your mental health struggles used against you as evidence of bad character. "That wasn't my intention," Diane said quietly. "Maybe not," Julia acknowledged. "But that was the effect. And intentions don't matter nearly as much as actions. You hurt me today, Diane. You hurt my reputation. You hurt my ability to do my job. And for what? For a segment that'll get people talking? For controversy that'll boost your ratings?" Diane looked directly at Julia, and for a moment the facade dropped completely. "I'm sorry. I'm sorry if you feel ambushed. That genuinely wasn't the intention." Julia studied her for a long moment. "If I feel ambushed? Diane, there's no if about it. This was an ambush. And your apology doesn't change that. It doesn't undo the damage." "What do you want me to do?" Diane asked, and she sounded almost desperate. "I want you to do better," Julia said simply. "I want you to remember that the people you interview are human beings, not just stories. I want you to verify your information before you go on air with it. And I want you to think about the real-world consequences of the questions you ask and the narratives you create." Diane nodded slowly. "You're right. You're absolutely right." Julia picked up her microphone from the chair and handed it to a crew member. "I hope you mean that. I really do. Because this industry needs journalists who actually care about truth, not just headlines." She started to walk off the set, but then she stopped and turned back one more time. "And Diane, that producer I told you about? His name is Richard Kellerman. You want a real story? Investigate him. Talk to the women he harassed. Tell their stories. That's journalism. What you did to me today? That's just noise." The studio erupted into chaos as Julia walked off. Diane stood there looking shell-shocked as producers rushed to figure out what to do next. The camera stayed on Diane for a few more seconds before finally cutting to commercial. What we witnessed was more than just a heated interview. It was a moment that exposed the tension between celebrity culture, media responsibility, and personal accountability. Julia Roberts didn't just defend herself. She challenged the entire premise of how these conversations happen, who gets to control the narrative, and what counts as truth in an age where anonymous sources and speculation often carry more weight than facts. The question isn't whether Julia was right or wrong to react the way she did. The question is whether we, as an audience, are okay with the kind of journalism that prioritizes controversy over context, that values drama over accuracy, that treats public figures as targets rather than people. Because what happened on that stage affects more than just Julia Roberts or Diane Sawyer. It affects how we consume media, how we think about celebrities, and how we hold both the famous and the journalists who cover them accountable. Make sure you subscribe to the channel and drop a comment below. What do you think? Was Diane Sawyer right to ask those tough questions, or did she cross a line? Let me know your thoughts.